Welcome to Beekeeping Today Podcast, presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today Podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, thanks a lot, Global Patties, for being there for us. You know, everyone, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today, and while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping, Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and our guest co-host Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. We have a fun episode set for you, and we've invited back in this episode 3 regional beekeepers from early last summer. Plus, we've got a new representative from the Pacific Northwest, and it's not me. So more on that in a little bit. Hey Kim, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Jeff. It's winter here in Northeast Ohio. I'm watching it snow. The grass is white. It was green yesterday, and it's white today. And the temperatures aren't brutal, but it's winter.
Into January, beginning of February, it's always a painful period.
I really empathize with hibernation and bears this time of year.
Well, not because you're grumpy.
No. Because I don't want to be grumpy.
There you go. Well, we talked about it last week. The almond growers are all out and they're heading to California. It sounds like it's pretty busy out there.
Yeah, it is. They're running full speed right now, and they will be for about 3 weeks or so, and then life will settle down a little bit as they go back, either head back home or head out to honey, one of the two. But yeah, right now the commercial beekeeping industry is flat out full speed.
Yeah, well, that's good. It's good for the beekeepers and good for the almond growers.
Yeah, I just hope the weather holds for everybody out there, both the growers and the beekeepers.
Well, yeah, I agree. I hope so too. Well, coming up this year, coming up in the next week, actually, the Western Apicultural Society has they have a monthly seminar series that they're putting on, and this is free. And so this coming Wednesday, January 20th, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Time, they have their seminar, and there's 2 presentations. The first one is on queen behavioral research by Melanie Kirby, and then from a second presentation on drone congregation area research from Julia Mahood, who uses aerial drones to do that research mapping and tracking. So that's pretty exciting. And for those of you who are listening and it's after January 20, don't despair, because that will be made available on YouTube. So check it out at westernapiculturalsociety.org mini conferences, and that's mini-conferences. It's always those free seminars is a good thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept for a regional group or even a national group, is to, instead of going annual, go once a month and make it virtual and make it available to people. I would guess they're going to be looking for some support from members and businesses, but this is pretty neat.
Yeah, it is. I think anytime any of the organizations provide free training, free information, that is a good thing, and it's fun listen to hear the latest and greatest. And they are able to do this through a generous grant donation from somebody to their WAS Zoom account, and they can have up to 1,000 people sign in. So it's better than your backyard Zoom conference. It's going to be a professional production by Dr. Jerry Bromenshank and team from WAS.
As much as this virus has been bad, it has led to some things I think that are good, and it has changed both the business world and the meeting world. It's opened it up for more people. I don't have to travel to someplace on the West Coast to attend a WAS meeting, and there's some value in that, I think.
Yeah, well, it cuts down on the travel for sure. We have also, talking about current events, a new website. I hope everyone's had a chance to go out and take a look at our new website at www.beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. It's laid out a little bit differently. That's more interactive. You can leave voicemail comments to Kim and I. You can leave reviews on site, and you can. It's a little bit more friendly than we had before. So I hope everyone gets a chance to go out and let us know what you think. And we set up Honeybee Obscura. We want to talk about that, Kim.
Yeah, that's you can get there from that webpage. It has its own webpage, www.honeybeeobscura.com. That's with Jim too and myself. We've got 4 choices out there right now already. We've got loaded, and what we've got coming up, Jeff. I don't know if you've taken a look. We've got things for basically getting ready for this time of the year. Equipment choices, 8-frame, 10-frame, those sorts of things. What kind of protective gear does Jim wear? Do I wear? Do you wear? What's available on the market? Advantages and disadvantages of getting and starting out with packages and nukes, and we got one more, and I can't remember. We've got 2 more, and I can't remember which one's next. But we've got at least those ready to go.
Yeah.
So if you go to the webpage, you'll see 4, and in the next several weeks, you'll see a bunch more.
Yeah, up there now we have, we have the introduction, but we also have emergency winter feeding, which is really key to right now for many folks.
That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And your bees, too. You're taking care of your bees as well.
Oh, yeah, those two, yeah.
Emergency winter feeding, off-season storage and chores of bee equipment. That's a good thing to know. Maybe a better one to know in the fall before you get in the middle of winter, but it's a good one. Midwinter inspections, that's something that's important right now. Folks should consider. And it's coming up this next Thursday will be equipment choices, as you mentioned. What types of hive equipment's out there and available, and what's good and what's not necessarily bad, but what's usable and what's not so usable.
You know, once you do one of those midwinter inspections, you're probably going to find out you need to do some midwinter emergency feeding. So they kind of go hand in hand.
They do. So you guys are doing a great job. Have some fun reviews already posted to your website. So keep up the good work, and I encourage everyone to get out to honeybeeobscura.com and listen to those podcasts and subscribe. Also coming up soon, we are working with Kirsten Trainer on her 2 Million Blossoms podcast. It'll be part of the Growing Planet Media group of podcasts that we're putting out. More on that as that is ready to release.
Sounds good, Jeff.
So, Kim, what do we have coming up today, our regional guests?
Well, you know, earlier this year we did regional beekeepers. We did, out east and northeast Ohio and the Rocky Mountains. We got those guys back today, and you've got somebody from the West Coast that isn't you that's going to talk about beekeeping out there. And just briefly, we got Mark Smith from North Carolina. We got Tracy Alarcon from northeast Ohio, just down the road from me here. And we got Ed Colby from the western slope of Colorado. And your new person is who?
Paul Longwell. He is a master beekeeper here from Olympia, Washington. And so he has experience in several different hive types, and I thought he'd be a good representative for the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, good. Well, let's get started.
First, a word from Strong Microbial, and then we'll drop right into the interview with the regional representatives.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbial's Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Hey guys, welcome back to Beekeeping Today Podcast.
Hello.
Jeff, we got a good show tonight. I want to introduce you to our regional beekeepers. We did them a while back, and it seemed to be a popular show, so we've got them back here. Plus, we've got somebody new. So I'm going to start with the East Coast. We've got Mark Smith in North Carolina, and then we've got Tracy Alarcon, who's up here with me in Northeast Ohio. We've got Ed Kobe in Colorado, and we've got Paul Longwell out by you, Jeff, in Olympia, Washington.
Yeah, you bet. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
It's good to have you back again. And the times have changed drastically since we talked, and I'm sure that some of the things that are going on have affected what you're able to do. We're going to start on the East Coast, I think, Jeff, and just work our way west and end up in your backyard there. So,
Sounds
Mark
good.
Smith, tell us a little bit about where you are in North Carolina, the kind of the size of your operation, and then I got a couple of questions for you.
Well, hello, Kim and Jeff and gentlemen. Thank you so much for asking us back.
Yeah.
We must have done a pretty good job last time to get the honor to come back. But
Well, you did.
Well, that's great. But I'm located in a little town called Locust, North Carolina. I'm about 35 miles east of Charlotte. The name of my operation is Flatwoods Bee Farm. I've been keeping bees since 2010. I've been chemical free since 2014. I run about 30 to 50 hives, depends on what time of year, and we're having a great time doing it.
Great.
Well, that sounds good, Mark. It was good talking to you last time, and we, of course, keep in touch in between. But, Mark, I got a quick question for you, and it's going to kind of go to everybody tonight. Of all the things that went on last year in your part of the world, what surprised you the most?
Well, we hit on it a little bit in the last podcast that we did. The early pollen flow here where I live in North Carolina, and Locust is about in the middle of the state. So I'm influenced a little bit from the coast and the mountains. But the pollen flow last year was early. And typically our first pollen comes from red maple. Well, red maple bloomed and was done a whole month ahead of schedule here where I live. So the brood up of all the colonies coming out of winter was very early and caught me off guard. And we had to chase that all year in 2020.
Yep.
But we learned a lot over the course of that chase. And hopefully we can implement some things in our management scheme this year in 2021 to better adjust what we do with the bees to accommodate for that. But that probably is the biggest thing that happened last year was the unexpected pollen flow for us.
Well, that kind of leads me to the next question, Mark, is, based on that, what surprised you last year and everything else that went on during the season, are you going to be doing anything different this year to accommodate that, to avoid the problems?
Absolutely. Like I said in the last episode, it seemed like our colonies, because of that early pollen, were huge coming out of January, and of course the colonies were peaking way earlier than what I would have wanted them to. I like to see them peak with the flow, but that didn't happen. So obviously you can imagine how hard it was to keep those bees in the boxes. And I had never really put in my management scheme early splits, taking a little bit of the pressure off of that colony at appropriate times in the early season. So that's one thing that I have learned, and I'm going to implement this year. Is once I see that is happening, go ahead and do a proactive split, even if it's small, just so I can take some pressure off of that colony, especially production colonies that produce honey. Because what we saw last year is the colonies that we had the most success keeping in the boxes were the mediocre colonies coming out of winter, because the early pollen flow didn't affect them quite as much as it did the ones that were already big to begin with.
Interesting.
That's an interesting observation. Well, given that, the early pollen flow and chasing bees all season last year, is there anything other than that was unique either last year or this winter, or that you're looking at maybe happening this coming spring and summer?
Well, there's really nothing else happened last year other than that. But, other than being 2020.
Well, there's that.
Yeah. I mean, but one thing that's changed this year, looking back at last year, is where we're at on that pollen flow. Last year, by this time, I already had red maple blooming. This year, we haven't had quite the temperatures to make that happen. If you're familiar with red maples, red maple will set the bud, it'll get that little bud there and wait. And it waits on warm weather. And if you get 5 consecutive warm days, that bloom will open. This year, we haven't had the temperature. So those buds are sitting there ready. But I guarantee you, just as soon as we have 5 consecutive days, and I'm talking 50 to 60 degrees here, those things will open. And we've had a lot. Of course, last year was very wet, and all winter we've had a lot of rain. So with the adequate amount of moisture in the ground, we're really anticipating a good flow here in North Carolina, like we had last year. But it's very optimistic going into 2021, and that's the biggest difference I see going into this year is the temperatures and what those red maples are doing.
Oh, red maple buds in January. Isn't there a law against that?
Hey,
there should be.
By January the 31st, we were done.
Wow.
And typically, that's a middle to end of February bloom for us. There's no wonder the bees didn't know what to do.
Okay. Well, Mark, thanks for that, giving the people in the southeast part of the U.S. a heads up on what maybe to expect this year and what happened last year. But next, we got Tracy Alarcon, and Tracy's just down the road from here in Northeast Ohio. And Tracy, can you imagine red maple buds in January?
No. I mean, right now, we had tons of snow, and it's been 30 degrees. Right now, there's, that there's bees in the box because it'll warm up a little bit and be a little bit of a cleansing flight, and they're cleaning out some of the dead stuff. But sometimes you might get some skunk cabbage or some witch hazel that might be blooming if that happens to be in your area, but the bees can't go get it because they're not really flying very far.
All things considered last year, Tracy, what surprised you the most?
Well, actually, what surprised me the most, like talked about it last time, was our weather was just all over the place. We'd had an 80-degree day, and then it snowed, and this was in early May. But where I live halfway between Akron and Youngstown, Ohio, just below I-76, which is in Diamond, Ohio. And for the last 5 years or so, I have not had a goldenrod flow. Usually we have a spring flow, then we have a summer dearth from about the solstice till about the end of July, approximately. And then sometime starting in first week in August or so, we start getting goldenrod blooming. And for the past 5 years or so, I've had the goldenrod bloom and get some pollen, but I have not gotten any nectar from it at all. And I guess because we had the right amount of rain at the right time, I mean, I average probably 70 pounds of goldenrod for each one of the 15 colonies that we have. So I was really excited about that because I like the goldenrod honey. But that really shocked me. So I was really happy about that.
Well, Tracy, there's a I'm not sure if it's a rule or a law, but there's a feeling that rain in May is going to give you honey in September with goldenrod. If you have a dry late spring, early summer, you're going to have flowers, but no or not much nectar to go with no goldenrod. So that doesn't surprise me because it sounds like you had a pretty wet spring, early summer.
Yeah, I think we did out where I am. I mean,
we did here too.
In the past, north of I-80, which is just a few miles north of me, they get a lot of thunderstorms all season long, and they always get a goldenrod flow when I'm talking to all the beekeepers up there because they get the moisture all summer long. But for the last 5 years, from June until September, basically, I'm almost in a drought.
Yeah, it's kind of lake effect rain up there, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
All the evaporation from the Great Lakes, and it just dumps up there. And the way the prevailing wind is, it drops plenty of rain up there. And luckily in short bursts, then the bees can go get whatever nectar the plants are producing. But so for me, I mean, I keep things real simple from year to year. I follow 4 basic rules with my colonies. And right now we went into winter with 15. But, I always make sure that all my equipment is in good shape all year long, especially this time of year because we get the wind blowing and we get the wind chill factor. So with winter, I don't want any extra gaps in my colonies. And then I always make sure they have enough food all season long, regardless of, what time of year it is. If they get below about 4 medium frames of honey, I start supplementing food. And then, of course, I look for mites and disease. And then last, I try to minimize whatever toxins I put in the colony. As I mentioned last time, I'm surrounded by a lot of backyard beekeepers. And we have a lot of migratory beekeepers that go east and west along I-76. So I get a lot of varroa pressure from a lot of these people and a lot of these beekeepers. But so because, I have the varroa pressure, I have to watch my varroa counts all season long. And so the last thing I do is I try to minimize whatever pesticide or toxins that I put into the colony. But so, that's what I do every year for about the past 15 years. I average 10 to 15% winter loss every year. But I think I attribute that mostly to just the fact that after the spring flow, I make a lot of splits around the summer solstice. So, Mark mentioned last time he does a lot of brood breaks, which is what I get when I make those splits, but I couple that with the oxalic acid treatment when they go broodless, and I end up with basically 0 mite counts through September, October, and then sometimes I get those mite bombs.
A quick question, Tracy. You mentioned making sure they have enough food. You're northeast Ohio. We're about the same north and south. You're a little bit east of me, but how much honey do you like to see on your colonies when you put them away for the winter?
Well, that's an arbitrary question because, like I mentioned, this year, because of all the goldenrod, I did something that I've done in the past where I stripped all the honey off the colonies and put a queen excluder down, and I feed them 50 pounds of fondant for the winter. So as long as I have 50 pounds of that baker's fondant, I've been able to get the bees through winter just fine on that. But that's because I'm being greedy, and I'll admit it. I wanted all that goldenrod honey. But if it's just the traditional wildflower honey that we get every spring and maybe a little bit of fall honey, I usually leave about 100 pounds on the colony, about 3 medium supers. So, that's 100, 125 pounds. Because I always figure that with our weather and in the springtime, you just never know when spring's going to hit here. And as we mentioned last year, May, we had snow. So I just like to leave all that extra food on. And then once the dandelions start really flowing, I can harvest last year's honey and put those wet supers right back on for them to fill up. So, but this year I was greedy. I took it all.
That's a good about calendar to follow in this part of the world. All things considered, Tracy, is there anything unique going on in your part of the world that you got to pay attention to, or is affecting what you do, or is making life better or worse?
Not that I can think of. I mean, I really can't. We have a number of different beekeeping clubs in the area, but our beekeeper numbers have been staying pretty stable. And I've noticed that, in Ohio, you have to register your apiary. You're required by law to register your apiaries with the state. And I've noticed that the numbers here in Portage County have stayed pretty consistent. And actually, it seems like a lot of the same people are registering their colonies each year. So we're not getting a big influx. I know when I first started being the inspector, we had this huge influx of beginning beekeepers, and then they would go away after a couple of years because their colonies died and didn't spend much time, I guess, studying and learning about beekeeping. But now we seem to have a pretty stable group, and I haven't noticed the same varroa pressures that I used to notice. And I just attribute that to a lot more education going on, especially, from the Honeybee Health Coalition and all the stuff that they put out. Because a lot of us, I'm president of our Portage Club, but a lot of us officers in the area have been pushing varroa control and nutrition. So I think that that's been a real positive lately, that there's just been more education going on that way.
Two good things to really focus on for colony health. There's no doubt about it. Tracy, thank you very much. I wish you luck this season, and if there's anything you think we can do, yell, all right?
All right, thank you.
All right. Next up, Rocky Mountains. Ed Colby. Ed Colby, you may recognize as one of the regular authors in Bee Culture Magazine, our sponsor. And Ed is a semi-commercial beekeeper in the mountains. Am I close there, Ed?
I think sideliner is the right term for that. But
okay.
Yeah, I have fewer and fewer hives every year just because I am trying to ease into retirement. But now I'm thinking I don't have enough. So I might have, instead of
okay.
I might have to expand my operation a little bit.
Well, one of the things I remember about you from last year and just knowing you for a number of years, Ed, is you've got bees that are low altitude, mid altitude, and up on the top of the mountain. And that really is it's got to be a challenge to think about those in the low area that are, have that kind of weather, and the ones that are up on the top that got snow in August.
Well, yeah. But remember, these bees at the high elevation, they don't live up there year round. So those bees that say go up to the flat tops, I've got a couple of yards at about 8,700 feet. Those little darlings are living down until I take them up there in the middle to late May. They're down here with my other colonies, my valley colonies, basically getting those same dandelions. So I'm treating them all the same, and then all of a sudden I'll take some up to a higher elevation where then their year kind of gets retarded a little bit. And I think I mentioned last time that very often I have bees, they get 2 doses of dandelions. They get them in the middle of May, and then they get them in the 1st of June. Just depending on the elevation.
That's got to be kind of neat from a colony's perspective to get, dandelion honey and dandelion pollen are both good.
As long as it's not snowing or raining, which it generally is during the season here.
Ed, all things considered, last year so you got bees high, middle, and low. What surprised you the most about that last year?
Well, I made some mention of this I said in Bee Culture Magazine in a column that has yet to be published that I had very good success overwintering my bees. And I said, I'm not going to tell you how successful I was because you'd call me a liar. But I'm going to tell you guys, what surprised me is that I had 100% survival in 80 colonies last winter. That was the first.
You're right. I don't believe you, Ed.
It might call me a liar. But the other thing that surprised me was the drought we had. We had a less than a quarter of an inch of rain between mid-March and the first week in February. And well, there's irrigation down here in the valley at 5,500 feet, but like up on the flat tops, there is no such thing. And
Wow.
by late July, it was crunchy underfoot up there, and I basically did not have a honey crop last year. You always get a little.
No honey, but all your bees.
Yeah. So what good are they?
That's that's a mixed blessing, but it's a blessing either way.
So now some other guys did a lot better than I did. It seems to be that my particular locations that I had just weren't, for whatever reason, suffered from the drought. But I have, but I had a couple of new locations drop into my lap that I'm going to try out at an intermediate altitude. They're at about 7,000 feet. So I'm going to try those next summer.
One of the things I didn't ask early on, Ed, is how many colonies are you running?
Well, depends when you ask. I have 70 colonies. Remember, I told you I had 80 coming out of spring, and I basically sold all the nukes that I made. I didn't really make any splits to speak of. So now I have 70 that I'm overwintering this winter.
And you're on the western slope, right, of Colorado?
Right. I'm 2.5 hours west of Denver, just off of I-70, in that kind of intermediate zone between the desert and the mountains. I'm kind of right at the edge of the Rocky Mountains.
Okay.
Well, Ed, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I'm an avid reader of your column every month, so I kind of keep track of what you and your operation are up to, but is there anything unique going on in your part of the world that you're going to have to pay attention to is going to be different or more of or less of this year? Rainfall probably is going to be your biggest issue, it sounds like maybe, but anything else going on?
No, I don't think so. Well, one issue is there are increasing numbers of backyard beekeepers. And at one of my locations, well, this is actually, these aren't my bees. These are my billionaire's bees. I have a billionaire, a very nice gentleman who pays me to take care of bees that I sold him. And these bees are close to a town that I shall not mention by name because I don't want any beekeepers from this town. I don't want them thinking that I'm picking on them. But man, the mite pressure is just astonishing. I had a number of using a number of treatments in late summer or after I got the honey off. While I had treatments on, I was having increasing numbers of mites.
Wow, that's got to be tough.
It is. It's a great place for honey, but you just really have to stay on top of the mites. Down here where I live, which is a less densely populated place, the mite pressure is a lot less. So and the two locations that I just mentioned that are my new locations, those are up in kind of halfway urbanized area. There's still some great honey forage up there, but I'm anticipating, and they're not far from my billionaire's bees, but I'm anticipating that I'm going to have increased raw pressure. But one thing that I'm planning on doing, this is a kind of a half-baked idea, but maybe you guys will have some thoughts about it. But I would really like to overwinter my bees in very temperate Colorado in singles. And the way I got the idea from this was I watched Gene Killian's video on making comb honey, and he advocates putting supers over a single brood super. Now, I did this up in the high country, and they didn't make any honey to speak. I got one super out of 10 hives, and I used Gene Killian's system for making very strong singles. I put in new Russian queens, and while I did not have a bang up honey crop, if I didn't say it, one super of cut comb honey from 10 hives, I lost a couple of those hives, but I did have 8 very strong singles going into fall. These bees did not, they're packed with honey. They did not swarm. And so I am wintering them one on top of another, too high. What I do is I put down some window screen. This is a real quick and dirty way of doing this. I put down some window screen. I put down a honey excluder. I put down another sheet of window screen. And then I put the second hive on top of that. And I've done that before, and I've been pretty successful with it. But I'm thinking that maybe I was talking about this with Tina. You guys may know who Tina Sebastian, my beekeeping buddy. So
she's also the president of the Colorado Beekeepers, isn't she, Ed?
She was the vice president when I was the president. So I said to Tina, "What do you think about this? What do you think about keeping bees in single supers?" And she said, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you, in the spring, when it is so important for queens to be putting out lots and lots of brood, instead of putting a deep super on top of your single, put a medium super on top of a deep. And put a queen excluder over that. So you have your queen confined to 1 1/2 supers. And then I thought, this is the brilliant part. She said, then, around June when things are slowing down, the inclination to swarm has greatly diminished. Shake those bees and the queen, or get the queen down into the lower box, and then put an excluder down there. Let them use what was a brood super, but a medium, and let them make honey in that. I thought I might try that. Well, the thought that I had was, if by confining the queen to one super, in which there will presumably be lots of honey because of that queen excluder. They don't like to go through that queen excluder. That this could reduce overall pressure by essentially creating a colony that is not quite so strong. But I'm getting the trade-off from, instead of having them put honey in that second super, they're putting honey into what was a brood super, a medium, that is going to turn into a honey super unless I decide that I need it. In other words, I would have the option of overwintering them either in one deep super or in 1 1/2.
Well, it sounds like a plan, Ed. Like I said, when we get back to you later next year, or later this year, let us know how that worked out. I'd be interested in that. It kind of sounds like Tom's 2-queen colony story, and a little bit, but you're doing it for a different reason. I got to move on, Ed. I want to talk to Paul Longwell. Paul's new to this group, and he's out in Washington with in Jeff's backyard, actually, almost. Paul, tell us a little bit about you and your operation and how you got involved in all this.
Well, I've been keeping bees for about 12 years now. More of a hobby beekeeper now that I've retired from my state job. I've got 7 colonies right now. I just downsized them to 7. Like everything else, they just multiply on you, and got to keep the wife happy. She's got to be able to walk around the property without being in the sideline of the bees. What I have is what I do is I spend a lot of my time training other beekeepers. So I run some top bars and some Langstroth, and this year I added the AZ Savanian hives in a bee house, and using different techniques for them. It's been a really interesting year. Our problem we have here in the Northwest is rain. Rain and moisture, and of course the varroa. And teaching beekeepers that varroa is serious and needs to be treated is a hard thing to do. In here, a lot of people say you don't put any pesticides or anything on bees. You don't treat them, and there's a lot of people that want to go natural, and their thinking is, well, if the bees aren't tough enough to make it, it's the bees' fault. And they don't realize how all these hives out here from all the amateur beekeepers and that are just spreading varroa all over the place. They bring their bees up from California. They don't treat them. And then next thing you know, you got varroa mites all over. So what I've done to fix it is I catalog the beehives near me by the beekeepers, and I volunteer free treatment of their hives, which has brought my varroa problem down.
Well, that's one way to alleviate that problem, or certainly to reduce that problem. Paul, you've been keeping bees a number of years. Tell me about last season. What surprised you the most? What was the biggest, oh my gosh?
What surprised me the biggest last year is the nectar flow did not stop.
Well, that's a hard problem to have.
I live in middle of 135 acres of old blueberry and woods and everything there that hasn't had any pesticides or anything on it for over 60 years. And it's all been given to the government for free for the rest of their life. So I'm in a perfect location. But last year I had, typically when you start new hives, you figure you're not going to get anything that year. I was averaging 70 to 80 pounds of honey off of each one of those hives, which was pretty good considering they're, just starting out, making their wax and making their comb and everything. I couldn't believe it.
I agree with you. That's hard to believe, but it's good that it happened. Jeff, you're in his part of the world. Did you see that too?
Well, I was just looking to see when our major flow here is for most everybody is the blackberry, the blackberry, and that seemed to die out mid-July, and it just everything stopped mid-July. It just dried up, and that's right in the middle of our drought season, or right at the beginning of our drought season. So it sounds like I need to move some hives up onto your property.
I'm
there,
thinking,
Paul.
Jeff. Yeah.
Because we're so wooded here for part of it. I was seeing blackberries in bloom in August and September.
Oh my gosh.
That probably has to do with the moisture, I'm guessing. The excess moisture you had?
We have a lot of moisture, and I got a lake here that's probably about 500 feet away from the property.
Okay.
So there's a lot of moisture out in that area, and one area is nothing but bog. You can get out there and walk on it and bounce.
Well, Paul, how do you, given that last year, what are you going to do this coming? Are you going to do anything different this year, or are you ready for an extended flow or no flow?
I think we're going to have a good flow. My issue this year is definitely going to be making sure I do my splits at the right time. I was in my hives yesterday in the bee house, and they're just loaded. They're typically on my Langstroth. There's no brood right now, but in my bee hut, there's brood, and they're already building out. And looking at the weather forecast, we're starting to get 50, 60 degree days.
Oh, rub it in, Paul.
But we're getting 90% to 70% rain.
Yeah, it's raining continuously.
Wow. That sound about right, Jeff? You think? For next year, for you?
Yeah, last year, I agree. I'm last year I was kind of like Paul. I was surprised at how quickly everything swarmed. It swarmed early last year, so I think we're going to have the same problem this year.
Oh, I'm just going to hope that they're still there next spring. Hey, guys, let's just start with Mark, and then we'll move through each of you. You got a quick question or two for anybody here that you might want answered that you think they have experience with, Mark?
Maybe a comment? Yeah, Ed, you
Sure.
said you were messing around with single overwintering in single deeps.
Yeah, I'm doing that. I'm doing that this winter, and I made some splits. A number of years I've made some fall splits, and I've overwintered them as singles, one on top of, but too high.
Yeah. Well, I started this probably 3 or 4 years ago, overwintering all my production colonies in single deeps. And the way I bring them out of winter to get them ready for production is, like you said, putting a super on and doing some kind of manipulation. All I do is I'll go along and put a medium super on everything, no queen excluder. Let that queen come up in it and start laying to get them to start moving up. And then probably, I'd say 2 weeks after she starts doing that, I'll go back to all my production yards and shake them out of it, back down into the deep, and put a queen excluder on, and then start putting supers on them.
See, that's really new to me.
That sounds like a lot of work.
But I wasn't going to do it with all my hives. I was just going to do it with a few. But queen excluders are kind of a new thing. I mean, I don't typically use queen excluders. I've kind of always been in favor of just letting the queen go wherever she wants. I've seen queens 6 supers up in a hive, but they always go back down in the fall.
Well, Tracy, you're in Northeast Ohio. You got anything that you want to know from any of these guys that are way different than you and I?
It's just really interesting listening to everybody. And, I mean, I've been doing kind of what Mark's been doing. I use all mediums, and I've gone through winter where I've overwintered, what I consider nukes as a 10 frame medium, overwintered with great success. I just have to make sure they have a lot of honey when I first put them in. And I think I mentioned last time when we spoke that I try to run a carniolan stock, so it keeps a real small brood nest all winter long. And when I propagate my queens, that's what I look for. So it's interesting to hear Ed talk about that. But, I use excluders all year long. And I mean, I find it after this long period of time when I'm trying to rotate out some of the old comb, that I have no problem getting the bees coming through the excluder by just putting brood up above the excluder. I used to do, like Mark said, when I used to shake them in front of the colony, but that got to be too much work. So I use a fume board, drive all the bees down into the lower box. I mean, there's a few bees up with the brood, but then I can just pop that super right off, put an excluder on, and I don't have to fight the bees so much. And I don't have to fight shaking all the bees out in front of the colony and all the bees in the air. And I mean, it's a little more expensive, but
a lot easier. Yeah. Not more expensive, but a lot easier.
I mean, you and I have always had this argument about time and money. I mean, it's really not that much more expensive when I figure my time of shaking 10 frames or 20 or 30 frames in front of a colony versus 3 or 4 minutes with a fume board, and I can move on to the next colony right away. So,
Ed, you got any questions for anybody here?
They do, but I have a really old brain, and sometimes I have a hard time with time. And I can't remember whether Tracy said this tonight or whether he said it last May. But he was talking about insulating hives. Is it you do insulate your hives, right?
I mean, the only insulation I do is the 2-inch styrofoam on top of the inner cover, between the inner cover and the outer cover. That's the only insulation I do.
Oh, good.
For a number of years, I used to wrap with tar paper, and that just, I'm old, fat, and lazy, and it got to be too much work. So now I just make sure all the equipment's in good shape, so that the corners aren't all rotten, so I don't have that whole wind flow. But I don't wrap. The only insulation, like I just said, is I put it on top of the inner cover, and that's it. I mean, when I worked as an inspector, I get called out in the winter to people's bees dying, and I would find, icicles on an inner cover because of the moisture going up and condensing on the inner cover and then freezing and dripping down on the bees. And so I found by just putting that insulation on top of the inner cover and under the outer cover, it minimizes that to no end. And then, there is some condensation there, but the bees need water in winter too. So, but it just doesn't freeze.
Well, I thought you and I had a difference in philosophy, but now I don't think we do. I've never wrapped a hive, and I don't see any reason to start.
Well, I'm sure with 70 or 80, it wouldn't work. I mean, when I got up to about 20 or 30, that was just way, way, way too much work to try to wrap them. And I found that I don't know. I found that I do better without wrapping them. But, that's pure anecdotal speculation. I mean, I never ran any type of side-by-side trial or anything. I just found that by having good, solid equipment, I do better than when I have beat-up, ugly equipment and try to wrap it and try to make it work.
Well, don't come and look at my bees, Tracy.
Oh, your bees are fine.
Paul, you've gone, mountains in Northeast Ohio and West Coast. You got any questions for these guys that might apply to you?
Well, I'd make some comment about that insulation. I use a 2-inch insulation too. But one thing I've done, which seems to help me a lot, is I run 8-frame equipment, but I put 10-frame top telescoping covers on the top with insulation on them. It also acts as more of a roof on it, and I don't have rain as much going down the sides into my boxes.
Well, I don't have the rain that you do, but I'm like you. Everything I own is 8-frame medium, and I hadn't thought about that 10-frame top on above. I may have to look into it. I got some old 10-frame tops next. I'll have to think about that next fall. Guys, this has been great. Thank you all for being here and for sharing what you've done and what you're going to do. And I hope all of you can come back again the next time we take a look at this year. Think about the questions we asked. What surprised you about, take notes this year and what surprised you about this year and what you might be doing different and try and remember about what was unique this year that we've never done before. Jeff, have we covered everything?
I think so. I really appreciate everyone's time this evening, and I know that this is always a good discussion for our listeners, and look forward to some feedback from them too, and we'll forward those on as we get them. Yeah,
Jeff, that's a good point. For those of you listening to this, if you got questions for these guys, go to our webpage, and Jeff's going to put that link in the. Well, Jeff, what's the webpage?
www.beekeepingtodaypodcast.com.
There you go. Go to that webpage, and there's a place in there to put questions. And if you got a question for Tracy or Paul or Ed or Mark, put that in there, and we will get it to them, and maybe we can get you some answers. So what else do we need to do here, Jeff?
I think that's it. Guys, really appreciate your time and wish you the best this coming season, and thanks for being
and we'll be back to you again this coming fall.
All right,
thanks guys.
For having us.
Nice.
Thanks for having us. Great as always. And we love the whole beekeeping podcast, by the way.
You bet.
Listen to a lot of them. They're
nice.
Very informative and kind of fun to listen to.
Oh, well, we can keep recording if you want to keep this kind of, talk going.
Well, no, I have no
Just
problem with
kidding.
that, but we'll expect a check in the mail at the end of the day. So.
Okay, that was good. There's a lot of regional stuff in there that people in those places are going to have to pay attention to, for early pollen flows and late pollen flows and all of those things. But I'll tell you something that transcends any location that those guys are at, or where you and I are at. And that is, you notice the Tracy's, the beekeeper population in Tracy's region is flattening out. And the number of colonies is flattening out, and the mite pressure is flattening out. And you go out to Ed's on the western slope of the Rockies out there, the number of beekeepers is increasing, the number of colonies is increasing, and the mite pressure is increasing. And no matter where you are, that there's a lesson right there to be learned is know, who's down the road from you 10 miles, who's new in your club, who's new in your region, because the more people you have, the more mites you're going to have. Flat out, basic, simple math.
Yeah, sadly so. That is a problem that we're all dealing with. So it was really interesting to hear that observation. Makes me think about who's around where I'm at and who comes through and who's not here. So that's
The nice thing about it is if you're paying attention and if you're attending the meetings and you're talking to people and you know that the population of beekeepers and hives is increasing, you will know to pay attention and you will know that you need to test more and you will know you need to probably treat more. But if you know ahead of schedule as opposed to playing catch up, you can stay ahead of this game, but you got to know.
Yeah. I definitely enjoy hearing from all those guys. So much to learn. Everyone has the same problems, but because of the regional differences, they treat them a little bit differently, or they have a different approach, a different perspective. So that's fun to hear. I know Mark has an Instagram account that he's very active on. He posts video and photos, so that's fun to monitor and watch too for folks who want to hear from some of the regional beekeepers that we have on the show.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to having them back next fall. I think we're targeting after the season.
For that.
Yeah, after the season.
That should be good, yeah.
All right, well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and stream the show. In fact, you can rate and review our show right from our brand new website. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know just what you like. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of this Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for being the latest supporter of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And finally, and mostly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
I think that wraps it up. I'm ready for hibernation.
All right. Have a good sleep.
Take care.